My children thought I had forgotten how to read a contract because I got old. They forgot I taught high school algebra for 35 years, and I count numbers faster than their calculators. My name is Anna Washington. I'm 70 years old. I live in the same house in Grove Park, Atlanta, that my husband Theodore and I bought in 1985, the year our oldest son Raymond started middle school. Theo has been gone for 8 months now. Pancreatic cancer. He fought it for 14 months, and I held his hand through every single chemotherapy session, every hospital stay, every bad night when the morphine wasn't enough. I'm sitting at my kitchen table right now. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I can't sleep anymore. Haven't slept a full night since Theo died. Before we begin, I want to say something. If you're watching this, please leave a comment telling me where you're from, and subscribe to the Never Too Old channel. We're building a community of women who know that wisdom doesn't retire when we do. Our best chapters can happen at any age. Now let me tell you what happened to me. In front of me on this table, there are 3 things. A will that was notarized last week. Bank statements from 2022 to 2025, all 347 pages of them. And a brown envelope that my husband left for me, sealed with his handwriting on the front. It says, "Open when you know." This coming Monday morning, my 2 remaining children are coming to this house. They're bringing a new will for me to sign. They think they're going to walk in here and pat my hand and call me Mama in that sweet voice they use when they want something. They think I'm a frightened old woman who just wants her Social Security check and her garden. They don't know I've spent the last 6 months preparing for this meeting. They think I'm the prey. I'm going to show them what I actually am. Theo didn't leave me a fortune when he died. He left me a map, and I've read that map more carefully than anything else in my life. So pour yourself some coffee. Sit down. Let me tell you about my family, about how I built everything I have from nothing, about how my own son tried to steal it from me while his father was dying, and about how I stopped him without ever raising my voice. I was born in Macon, Georgia in 1955. My father worked in a paper mill for 41 years. My mother took in laundry from white families across town, scrubbing sheets in a wash tub on our back porch until her hands cracked and bled every winter. We lived in a 4-room shotgun house on Pio Nono Avenue, 5 of us. I was the middle child, the quiet one, the one who hid in corners with library books. I was the first person in my family to finish high school, the first to go to college. I got a scholarship to Spelman College in 1973, $200 short of what I needed, and my mother sold her wedding ring to make up the difference. She never told me. I found out 10 years later when I asked her where the ring had gone. I studied mathematics, graduated in 1977, started teaching algebra at Frederick Douglass High School that same fall, making $18,400 a year. I met Theodore Washington in the spring of 1978. He was 24, working as a bricklayer for a contractor building an addition to the school library. Tall, quiet, hands rough as tree bark. He ate his lunch on the low wall outside my classroom every day for 6 weeks before he said a word to me. When he finally did, he said, "Ma'am, I've been trying to figure out how to ask you something without seeming disrespectful." I said, "Then ask it respectful and we'll see." He asked me to dinner. I said yes. We were married 2 years later, on June 14, 1980, at the AME Church on Auburn Avenue. I wore my mother's wedding dress, let out at the waist. Theo wore a suit borrowed from his uncle. Our whole reception was a cookout in my parents' backyard. We had 47 people there and 3 types of potato salad. We moved into a rented apartment on Simpson Street. Theo kept laying bricks. I kept teaching. We saved every penny we could. By 1982, we had $6,000 in a savings account at First National Bank of Atlanta, and we were talking about buying a house. Then, in March of 1983, the contracting company Theo worked for went under. Just like that. His boss disappeared with 2 weeks of back pay owed to Theo and 11 other men. We lost everything we'd been saving toward because Theo had to cover our rent and groceries for 3 months while he looked for work. He couldn't find any. Atlanta construction in 1983 wasn't kind to a black man with no college degree and a boss who'd run off. I remember the night he sat at our little kitchen table, head in his hands, and said, "Anna, I don't know what to do." I said, "Theo, why don't you work for yourself?" He looked at me like I was crazy. "With what? I don't own a truck. I don't own tools. I don't have a single client." I got up. I went to our bedroom closet. I pulled out a folder I kept on the top shelf. Inside was paperwork from the Georgia Teachers Retirement System. I had $12,000 accumulated from 6 years of teaching, and I could take it out as a loan against my future benefits. I put the folder in front of him. I said, "We'll buy you a truck. We'll buy you tools, and we'll build something." He said, "Anna, that's your retirement." I said, "Theodore, I'm 28 years old. I've got 40 years to build another retirement. What I don't have is time to watch you sit at this table losing yourself." We registered Washington Construction Group on April 3, 1983. The paperwork is still on file at the Georgia Secretary of State's office, and I want you to remember this detail, because it matters more than anything else in this whole story. The company was registered under both our names, Anna Marie Washington and Theodore James Washington. But because I was the one with a steady paycheck and good credit, because I was the one who signed the loan documents, because I was the one who opened the business bank account, the ownership was split 55% to me and 45% to Theo. We never changed it. Not once in 42 years. Theo was the face of that company. He was the man who shook hands with white contractors in Atlanta in the 1980s. He was the man who bid on jobs and walked construction sites and made deals, and he was brilliant at it. But for the first 15 years, I was the one who kept the books. I wrote every invoice. I negotiated with every supplier. I did the payroll on Sunday nights at this same kitchen table while my children slept upstairs. By 1995, we had 17 employees. By 2005, we had 42. By the time Theo retired as day-to-day operator in 2020, Washington Construction Group was worth $8.5 million. Plus, we had another $3 million in commercial real estate and about $2.5 million in savings and investments. $14 million total. Every penny of it came from Theo's hands and my head. I want you to understand that. Because later in this story, my son Raymond is going to try to take it from me, and he's going to think he can do it because he assumes his father built it alone, and his father is dead, and his mother is just an old woman who taught school. Raymond forgot who signed that first loan. We had 3 children. Raymond came first, born November 2nd, 1977. He was brilliant from the day he could talk. Read at 4. Skipped 2nd grade. By the time he was 15, he was correcting his high school teachers on calculus problems. We sent him to Morehouse College, where he graduated summa cum laude in 1999. Then Harvard Law School, class of 2002. Theo and I sold a plot of land we'd been holding in South Atlanta to pay for his last year of Harvard. $47,000. Theo didn't hesitate. Neither did I. Raymond became a financial lawyer. He specializes in estate planning, trusts, and tax strategy for wealthy families. He works at a firm in Buckhead, the richest part of Atlanta. He married a woman named Meredith, a white woman from Greenwich, Connecticut, whose father is a retired banker and whose family spends every August in Martha's Vineyard. They have 2 daughters, my granddaughters, Olivia and Charlotte, ages 12 and 9. I've seen those girls 4 times in the last 3 years. Raymond calls me once a month, always on the 3rd Sunday, always for exactly 22 minutes. I know because I started timing the calls 2 years ago, after I realized I was always the one saying, "Well, I'll let you go, son." He never said it first. He just waited for me to say it. In 2015, Raymond came to visit and said to his father, "Dad, we should really restructure the company. An LLC with some specific estate planning clauses could save the family a lot of money in the long run." Theo looked at him over the top of his newspaper and said, "Son, I don't need you rewriting what I built with my hands." Raymond smiled that smile of his, the one that looks polite but isn't. He said, "Just something to think about, Dad. I remember that moment now. I didn't think anything of it then, but I remember it now. David came second, born August 19th, 1980. My middle child. I have to stop for a minute when I talk about David. David was not a brilliant student like Raymond. He wasn't ambitious like Patricia would turn out to be. David was like his father, quiet, steady, built with his hands, not his mouth. He graduated high school in 1998 and told us he didn't want to go to college. Theo and I sat him down at this same kitchen table, and Theo said, "Son, are you sure?" And David said, "Dad, I want to work with you. I want to learn the business from the ground up, not from a book." Theo cried. I don't think Theo ever cried in front of the boys except that day. David started as a laborer on our crews, same pay as anyone else. He worked his way up to foreman by the time he was 26. He knew every man on every crew by name, knew their wives' names, knew their kids' names. When a worker got hurt, David drove to the hospital. When a worker's mother died, David went to the funeral. He married Deborah Johnson in 2002, a nurse from Savannah. She was the kind of woman who hugged everyone she met, who brought food to people she barely knew when they were sick. She and David had one child, my grandson Malik, born March 14, 2003. On November 8, 2019, there was an accident at a construction site in Decatur, a scaffolding collapse. David and 2 other workers were on it. The other 2 men survived with injuries. David didn't. He fell 4 stories and died at the scene before Deborah could even get to the hospital. She was driving there when she got the call. She pulled over on I-285, and a drunk driver in a pickup truck hit her from behind at 70 miles an hour. She died 3 hours later in the same hospital where David had been declared dead that morning. Malik was 16. He had breakfast with his parents that morning. By dinner, he was an orphan. Theo and I brought him home to live with us that night. He stayed in Raymond's old bedroom until he graduated high school in 2021. He got into Georgia Tech for engineering, civil engineering, just like his grandfather built his whole life around. I want you to remember Malik, because this whole story, in the end, is really about him. Patricia came last. Born April 30th, 1981. We called her Trisha when she was little. Patricia was beautiful. I'll say that honestly. By the time she was 14, grown men were looking at her in ways that made me want to pick up a baseball bat. She knew it too. She learned early that beauty opens doors, and she used that knowledge without apology. She enrolled at Clark Atlanta University in 1999. Dropped out after her sophomore year to marry Jerome Brooks, a real estate developer 8 years older than her. Jerome had family money from a funeral home business in Alabama. He was good-looking and charming, and he drove a Mercedes, and Patricia was 20 years old and convinced she'd found her ticket. They got married in 2002 at a country club I couldn't pronounce the name of. Theo wore a tuxedo and looked uncomfortable the whole day. I cried at the ceremony, but not happy tears. I already knew. Patricia got her real estate license and became a high-end broker. She and Jerome bought a $1.2 million house in Cascade Heights. They had 2 daughters, Amara and Zuri, ages 15 and 11 now. Patricia calls me Mama in a voice like honey, but she never comes to my house without asking for something. Money to lend, me to babysit, a referral through her father's contractor network, something. Jerome and I never warmed to each other. He calls me Ma instead of Mama, and I hate it, but I never corrected him. I should have. For most of my life, I thought everything was handled. I thought my family was solid. Theo and I had a will drawn up in 2018. Our longtime family attorney, a man named Harold Jenkins, put it together. The plan seemed fair to me at the time. 40% to me, including the house and operating control of the company. 20% to Raymond. 20% to Patricia. 20% to Malik, held in a trust until he turned 25, to be managed by Raymond as trustee. Total estate value, about $14 million. Enough that every single one of us would be comfortable forever. Theo and I signed that will together. We went out for dinner afterward at Pascal's, had fried chicken and collard greens. Theo said, "Anna, we did good. Our kids are set. Our grandbaby is set. Now we can just get old." We had 7 more years together after that. They were good years mostly. Then the cancer came in the fall of 2023, and everything changed. 3 days before Theo died, he was in and out of consciousness. The morphine kept him from too much pain, but it also kept him from being fully himself. We had a hospice nurse with us around the clock. I slept in the chair beside his bed. On January 5th, 2025, around 2 in the morning, he squeezed my hand hard enough to wake me. His eyes were clearer than they'd been in days, lucid the way cancer patients sometimes get right near the end. He said, "Anna." I said, "I'm here, baby." He said, "Anna, when I'm gone, don't you trust nobody. Not even our own. Especially Raymond. Something ain't right." I said, "Theo, what do you mean?" He shook his head slowly. "Papers." He brought papers. I didn't read them right. "Watch yourself, Anna. Watch Malik." Then he closed his eyes, and he drifted again. He died 3 days later, January 8th, 2025, at 4:47 in the afternoon. I thought what he said was the morphine talking. I thought it was a dying man's confusion. I thought wrong, and that mistake almost cost me everything my husband and I spent 42 years building. The first sign came on March 14th, 2025, Malik's birthday. He turned 22 that day. Malik was at Georgia Tech by then, living in a dorm, working part-time at a Home Depot in Midtown to have spending money. I invited him to dinner at my house to celebrate. I made his mother Deborah's fried chicken recipe, which Malik loved more than anything in the world. We sat at this same table. I'd made a small chocolate cake. I gave him a card with $500 in it, and he tried to refuse it, the way he always does, and I told him to stop being stubborn and take the money. Then, because I'd been thinking about it, I said, "Malik, baby, how are you managing? Tuition and everything? You know your grandpa set up that trust for you right after your mama and daddy passed." He looked at me and his face got confused. He said, "Grandma, what trust?" I said, "The Education Trust, $2.8 million. Uncle Raymond is the trustee. Honey, you've got more than enough to pay for Georgia Tech 3 times over. You don't need to be working at Home Depot." He said, "Grandma, I don't have any trust. Uncle Raymond told me last July, right after Grandpa's funeral, that Grandpa had intended to set something up for me but never finished it. He said it was just a plan that didn't get executed. He told me not to bring it up to you because you were grieving." I felt something cold move down my spine. I can still feel it now, describing it. I kept my face still. I'd spent 35 years as a school teacher. I know how to keep my face still when a child tells me something that shatters my world. I smiled and said, "Well, honey, maybe I'm misremembering. Your grandpa talked about so many things toward the end. My memory isn't what it was." Malik nodded and went back to his chicken. But I went into Theo's home office after Malik left that night. I opened the fireproof safe in the closet. I took out Theo's personal notebook, the one he'd kept his business records in for the last 10 years of his life. I turned to the page marked September 15th, 2020. In Theo's own handwriting, in blue ink, it said, "Transferred $2.8 million into Malik's Education Trust today. Raymond set up as trustee per family tradition. Gregory reviewed the books. Set up irrevocable. Boy will be taken care of." I sat in Theo's office chair for a long time. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I was somewhere else. Somewhere colder than grief. Then I picked up the phone, and I called Eleanor Whitfield, my oldest friend, the woman who had been my roommate at Spelman College in 1973, the woman who had stood next to me at my wedding in 1980, the woman who had become one of the best estate attorneys in Atlanta. It was 11:30 at night. She picked up on the second ring. I said, "Eleanor, I need you. Something is wrong." She said, "Tell me what you know." I told her. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Anna, listen to me carefully. Do not call Raymond. Do not ask Patricia anything. Do not touch any documents. Meet me at the Auburn Avenue Library Monday morning at 10. Bring everything Theo wrote in that notebook. Bring the will from 2018. Bring anything you have from the bank." I said, "Eleanor, is this what I think it is?" She said, "Anna, I've known you 47 years. I'm not going to tell you what I think until I have proof, but I want you to start acting normal. Call Raymond tomorrow. Ask him about the grandchildren. Don't let your voice change. Can you do that?" I said, "Eleanor, I taught 9th graders algebra for 35 years. I can act normal through anything." She laughed a short, dry laugh. She said, "That's my Anna. Monday, 10 o'clock. I'll bring coffee." I hung up the phone. I sat in Theo's chair. I looked at his notebook, still open to that page from 2020. I said out loud to the empty room, "Theo, I hear you, baby. I'm watching now." Outside, through the window, the magnolia tree Theo had planted in 1985 was starting to show buds. Spring was coming to Atlanta. It was going to be a long spring. Monday morning, April 2nd, 2025, the Auburn Avenue Research Library. I'd been coming to this library since I was a graduate student at Spelman. It's the kind of place where Black history lives in the walls. Photographs of Martin Luther King on the second floor. First editions of Zora Neale Hurston behind glass. Quiet rooms where nobody bothers an old woman reading. Eleanor was already at a corner table on the 3rd floor when I walked in. She had 2 cups of coffee and a leather folder. She's 71, 6 months older than me, and she still wears her hair natural, in a short silver crown around her face. Her glasses sat low on her nose. I sat down. She pushed a coffee toward me. She said, "Anna, before we start, I need to ask you something. Are you sure you want to know what I find? Because once we start pulling this thread, I can't put it back." If Raymond has done what your gut says he's done, then we are going to blow up your family. I need you to be certain. I took a long drink of that coffee. It was hot enough to burn my tongue. I welcomed it. I said, Eleanor, my husband spent his last lucid moments on this earth warning me about my own son. I owe Theo the truth. I owe Malik the truth. I owe myself the truth. Pull the thread. She nodded once. She opened the folder. She said, then let's start with the bank. Diane Holloway had been the branch manager at First National Bank of Atlanta on Martin Luther King Jr. Drive for almost 30 years. She'd handled every account Theo and I ever had. She'd been at our daughter's baby shower. She'd been at David's funeral. Eleanor had already called her over the weekend. Monday afternoon, I walked into Diane's office, and she was waiting for me with a stack of printouts 6 inches thick. She closed the door. She sat me down. She said, Anna, I've been a banker for 32 years. I've seen a lot of things. What I'm about to show you is the worst thing I've ever seen one family member do to another. Are you ready? I said, show me. She spread the papers across her desk. She'd organized them by date, with the suspicious transactions circled in red ink. She walked me through each one. March 17th, 2023. Raymond, acting as trustee, transferred $850,000 from Malik's Education Trust into an account titled Washington Family Holdings, LLC. I'd never heard of that company. Raymond had registered it in Delaware 6 months earlier. Delaware, because Delaware doesn't require the names of LLC members to be made public. August 22nd, 2023. Raymond transferred $1,200,000 from the trust into a personal brokerage account held in the name of Meredith Washington, his wife, my daughter-in-law, the woman who sends me a Christmas card every year with a photograph of her parents' house on Martha's Vineyard. January 11th, 2024. $400,000 transferred from the trust to Jerome Brooks Development, LLC, my son-in-law's company, which meant Patricia and Jerome knew, which meant this was not just Raymond acting alone. June 3rd, 2024. $300,000 transferred into a hedge fund called Peachtree Strategic Partners, where Raymond was the sole signatory on behalf of the trust. Diane pointed to the bottom line of the most recent statement. The current balance of Malik's Education Trust was $47,183.22, from $2.8 million down to $47,000, in 26 months. While Theo was dying, while I was changing his sheets at 3 a.m. and holding a plastic bowl while he threw up his chemotherapy medication, I looked at those numbers. I looked at them for a long time. Diane said softly, Anna, I tried. I flagged the first 2 transactions internally. I got overruled because Raymond had the trustee authority, all the documentation was in order on paper, and the trust document Theo signed specifically gave the trustee broad discretion over investment decisions. Technically, he wasn't breaking the law that I could prove. I'm so sorry, I should have called you. I put my hand over hers. I said, Diane, you did what you could. None of this is your fault. It's my son's fault. And now he is going to answer for it. I gathered up the papers. I put them in the leather tote bag I'd brought with me. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot for 40 minutes before I could drive home. I didn't cry. I just sat there, looking through the windshield at a CVS across the street, watching an old man walk his little white dog across the parking lot. 40 minutes. Then I drove home. I called Eleanor. I said, it's worse than I thought. Come to the house Wednesday. We need to plan. Wednesday, April 9th, 2025. Eleanor came to my kitchen with her folder and a laptop. She'd been busy in the 4 days since we met at the library. She spread her findings across my kitchen table. She'd found what I hadn't even known to look for. 3 months before Theo died, an amendment to his will had been filed with the Fulton County Probate Court. Dated January 8th, 2025, which also happened to be the day Theo died. The amendment dramatically changed the 2018 will. Under the amendment, Malik's trust was dissolved and the remaining funds rolled into general family assets to be distributed at the discretion of the executor. Raymond was named sole executor with full discretionary authority over the estate. 51% of the company's ownership was transferred from me to a newly created family management board consisting of Raymond and Patricia. My 40% personal share was reduced to a monthly living allowance of $8,000 to be administered by the executor. In other words, my son and daughter had used their own father's death to take my company, take my grandson's college money, and put me on an allowance like I was a child. Eleanor had brought something else. She pulled out a report, a handwriting analysis, 50 pages long, prepared by Dr. Howard Pierce, a forensic document examiner at Georgia State University. Eleanor had provided Dr. Pierce with 200 samples of Theo's genuine signature from documents spanning 20 years. She had given him the signature on the January 8th Amendment. She had asked for his professional opinion. His conclusion on page 47 stated that the signature on the amendment was a forgery. Confidence level, 94%. The forger had studied Theo's handwriting carefully and had accounted for the tremor in his hand from the cancer. But the pen pressure was wrong. The angle of certain letters was inconsistent with every genuine sample. The person who signed that document was not Theodore James Washington. I looked up from the report. I said, "Eleanor, who notarized it?" She said, "A notary named Kevin Morales, works at a small office in Midtown. Want to guess who owns the building that office is in?" I already knew. She said, "Jerome Brooks." I closed my eyes. I thought about my daughter, my beautiful daughter Patricia, who used to sit on my lap and ask me to braid her hair, who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and call them flowers. My daughter, who had let her husband arrange for a fake notary to forge her dying father's name on a document stealing her own mother's inheritance. Eleanor said, "Anna, there's more. I was going to save this, but I think you need to know now." She pulled out a printed email. She'd gotten it through Diane's bank records, which had been subpoenaed during an earlier unrelated investigation into Jerome's business practices. Fortune had given us this small gift. The email was from Patricia to Raymond, dated January 6, 2025, 2 days before Theo died. It said, "Daddy signed, got Kevin to witness. Mom doesn't need to know yet. We'll handle the paperwork after the funeral. Jerome says the transfers should be clean by February if we move fast." I read that email 3 times. Then I folded it in half. I placed it back on the table. I took a sip of my now cold coffee. I said, "Eleanor, I need you to help me, not to get revenge, to correct a wrong, legally and completely. And I need 6 months to do it right." Eleanor looked at me over her glasses. She said, "Anna, what is your plan?" I looked out the window at the magnolia tree Theo had planted in 1985. It was covered in white blossoms now, the size of teacups. I said, "I want them to dig their own graves. I'll provide the shovels." I called it Project Magnolia, named for Theo's tree. The first rule I made for myself was this: no one in the family can suspect anything. Not Raymond, not Patricia, not Jerome, especially not Malik. I wouldn't let that child be dragged into this until it was safe for him. I built a team, quietly, carefully. Eleanor Whitfield was my lead attorney, but because of our 47-year friendship, we had to be careful. We never met at her office. We never met at mine. Always public places. The library, a coffee shop in East Point called Sip and Read, the back room of the AME Church Fellowship Hall. I paid her in checks drawn from a personal account Raymond didn't know existed, one I'd opened in 1992 and kept under my maiden name, Anna Marie Johnson, at a small credit union. Gregory Sullivan had been our family accountant for 25 years. When I first suspected him of being involved, I was ready to cut him out entirely. But Eleanor dug through his files and found something remarkable. Gregory had flagged 17 of Raymond's transfer requests over a 2-year period. Each time, Raymond had found a way to work around Gregory by going directly to the bank with the trustee paperwork. Gregory had saved every email in which he'd refused to sign off on the transactions. I met Gregory at a Waffle House in Smyrna on April 14th. I slid into the booth across from him. I laid out what I knew. Gregory didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he took off his glasses, wiped his eyes with a paper napkin, and said, "Anna, I knew something was wrong. I tried to tell Theo in 2023, but he was already sick, and I didn't have proof. I just had a bad feeling. I have been sick about this for 2 years. I will testify. I will give you every document. I will walk into federal court myself if you need me to." I reached across the table. I took that man's hand. I said, "Gregory, thank you. You are a good man." He said, "Anna." I should have pushed harder. I said, "You pushed as hard as you could without breaking. That's all anyone can ask." Dr. Howard Pierce, the handwriting expert, became the 3rd person on my team. Through Eleanor, I retained him under an independent contract. He would be available to testify at any hearing or trial. He was paid through Eleanor's firm, which meant Raymond, if he ever investigated, would have no way to connect Dr. Pierce back to me. Diane Holloway at the bank didn't join my team officially, but she pledged to provide any documentation I needed through legal channels. Her only request was that I protect her from retaliation if Raymond figured out she had helped. I promised her I would, and Reverend Thomas Baxter at my church, who had baptized Malik when he was 6 weeks old, became the 5th person. I didn't tell him everything at first. I just started coming to church again after months away. I started having long conversations with him after Sunday service. About family, about faith, about what happens when your own children disappoint you in ways you never imagined. He listened. He prayed with me. And when the time came for the final step of my plan, he would play a role none of my children saw coming. Over the next 3 weeks, Eleanor and I found 5 legal weaknesses in what Raymond and Patricia had done. I want you to understand these, because I want you to understand that this was not revenge. This was the law, applied correctly, to wrongdoing that had been hidden in the dark. The first was ownership of the company. As I told you before, Washington Construction Group was registered in 1983 with me as the 55% majority owner. Raymond had assumed for his entire life that the company was his father's. He'd never looked at the founding documents. If he had, he would have seen my name on the very first line. The company had always been mine, legally speaking. Theo's 45% share was his to leave to whoever he wanted. But Raymond couldn't transfer my 55% away from me, because it had never belonged to his father in the first place. The second was the real will. Eleanor revealed to me, sitting at this kitchen table on a Tuesday in late April, that Theo had actually executed a new will on June 12, 2024, 6 months before he died, while he was still fully mentally competent. She showed me the document. I had never seen it. In that will, Theo left his entire 45% of the company to me. Combined with my existing 55%, that gave me 100% ownership after his death. He reinforced Malik's trust with a spendthrift clause and an irrevocable structure, meaning Raymond as trustee could only administer it for Malik's benefit and could never divert funds elsewhere without committing a crime. He left Raymond and Patricia $500,000 each, not a share of the company, not a share of the real estate, a fixed amount, period. And he included a no contest clause and a bad acts clause, which meant that if any heir engaged in fraud or misconduct regarding the estate, they would forfeit their entire inheritance. Theo had seen it coming. He had planned for it. My husband, dying of pancreatic cancer, had used his last months of clear thought to protect me. I held that 2024 will in my hands for a long time. Eleanor let me. The third weakness was the trust itself. The spendthrift structure meant that every single transfer Raymond had made out of Malik's trust, totaling roughly $2,750,000, was a federal crime. Embezzlement of a trust, 5 to 20 years per offense. The fourth was fiduciary duty. As both the trustee of Malik's trust and the family's primary estate attorney, Raymond owed me a fiduciary duty. Hiding the 2024 will, moving assets, preparing a false amendment. Each of these acts was a severe breach. The Georgia Bar Association, I was told, takes fiduciary breaches very seriously. Raymond could lose his license to practice law entirely. The fifth was federal jurisdiction. Some of Raymond's transfers had moved money across state lines, specifically to Meredith's brokerage account in Connecticut. That single fact took the case out of Georgia State Court and into the jurisdiction of the FBI and IRS Criminal Investigation Division. What was a civil matter at the state level became a federal criminal matter. Eleanor laid out all 5 for me. She said, "Anna, with these facts, we can absolutely destroy him, if that's what you want." I said, "Eleanor, I don't want to destroy him. He's still my son. I want him to understand what he did. I want him to pay it back. I want Malik made whole. And I want my family protected going forward, but I am not going to put my own child in prison unless I absolutely have to." Eleanor said, "Then we build the case completely, and we hold it over his head like a sword. If he cooperates, we negotiate. If he fights, we use it." I said, "Yes, that's exactly right." We spent 3 months gathering evidence, April into July. By the end of it, I had 347 pages of bank statements, every suspicious transaction marked and annotated. Dr. Pierce's 50-page handwriting analysis, 23 emails between Patricia, Raymond, and Jerome obtained through legal discovery processes related to Jerome's separate business issues. Gregory's sworn affidavit, signed and notarized, listing every transaction he had refused to process and every email in which Raymond had pressured him. Theo's medical records from Emory University Hospital, showing that on January 8, 2025, the day the forged amendment was allegedly signed, Theo had been unconscious or severely sedated from early morning onward. He could not have signed anything that day, but the most important piece of evidence was something I discovered by accident. One afternoon in late May, I was in Theo's office, going through old files in his desk, looking for a warranty on the water heater. I found a small flash drive in the back of a drawer, taped to the underside with a piece of masking tape. The tape had Theo's handwriting on it. It said, "For Anna, when you know." I took it to my niece's son, who works in IT at Georgia Power. I didn't tell him what was on it. I just asked him to help me look at it. What was on it was security camera footage. I hadn't known it, but Theo had installed a small camera in the corner of his hospital room at home back in December of 2024 without telling anyone. The camera had a motion sensor. It recorded anyone who came or went from his bedside. The footage from January 8, 2025 showed Theo in his bed, unconscious, all day. The hospice nurse coming in at 7 a.m. to check his IV. Me coming in at 9 a.m. to read him a psalm, the way I did every morning. The nurse again at 11 and 1 and 3. Me coming back at 4:30 to sit with him as the end approached. No one else entered that room all day. Not Raymond, not Patricia. No notary, no witnesses. No one presented Theo with any document to sign that day. The amendment was not just a forgery in terms of the signature. The entire premise of it, that Theo had signed it at his deathbed, was a lie. I sat on the edge of my bed the night I saw that footage, and I whispered, "Theo, you saw this coming. You really saw it coming." And then I opened the sealed envelope, the one he'd left me. The one that said "Open when you know." I had been waiting. Inside was a letter, in his handwriting, dated December 20th, 2024. I'm going to read it to you exactly as he wrote it. "My dear Anna, if you are reading this, it means you figured it out. I'm sorry. I wanted to be wrong. Raymond came here yesterday with papers. He said they were updates to our medical directive. I read them. They were not medical directives. They were financial documents trying to give him power of attorney over your share of the company. I didn't let on that I knew. I signed a different piece of paper. I signed a blank sheet, Anna. I wanted to see where it ended up. I called Eleanor the next day. She came to the house when you were at the grocery store. She drew up a new will, the right one, the real one. It is in her office safe. She has everything. You were the real owner of that company from the first day. You signed the loan. You signed the incorporation. I never forgot, even if Raymond did. Don't trust Raymond. Patricia is doing what he tells her, but she is also doing what Jerome tells her. And Jerome is the one who cooked this up, I am sure of it. But my daughter is not innocent. You have to see that, Anna. You have always wanted to see the best in her. I need you to see the truth now. You are smarter than all three of them put together. You always have been. If you have to fight, fight like you used to teach math. One step at a time, no emotion, until you find the right answer. I love you. I have loved you since the day I sat on that wall outside your classroom, and you told me to ask respectfully. I will see you again someday. Take your time getting here. Your Theodore. I read that letter twice, sitting on my bed. Then I folded it back up. I put it in the fireproof safe with all the other evidence. I didn't cry. Theo would not have wanted me to cry. He would have wanted me to work. I said out loud to the empty bedroom, "All right, Theo, I'm solving your math." The hardest part of those 3 months was keeping a normal face in front of my family. I had to pretend nothing was wrong. Every Sunday when Raymond called, I had to listen to him talk about Meredith and the girls and his firm, and I had to sound like his sweet old mother, slightly distracted, slightly forgetful, slightly grief-stricken. I had to say, "Oh, that's nice, honey," and "How are my grandbabies?" and "Tell Meredith I said hello." I had to invite Patricia over for Sunday dinner twice a month. I had to let her kiss my cheek and call me mama and talk about her real estate listings. I had to hold her daughters on my lap and let them tell me about their school. One Sunday in late June, while Patricia was helping me dry dishes, she said, "Mama, have you been feeling all right? You seem distracted lately." I smiled and said, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm just an old woman missing her husband. Some days are harder than others." She patted my arm. She said, "Mama, Raymond and I have been talking. We want to make sure you're taken care of. Maybe it's time we sat down and talked about some of the financial stuff, just to make things easier on you." I said, "Oh, honey, I don't know anything about that. Your father handled all of that. You children decide what's best. I just want to be able to keep my garden and see my grandbabies." Her whole face relaxed. I saw it. The relief. The confirmation that I was exactly what she hoped I was. A sweet, confused old woman who would sign whatever they put in front of her. That night, after she left, I sat on my porch and I thought about my daughter. I thought about the little girl I'd carried on my hip for 3 years. The teenager I'd comforted when her first boyfriend broke her heart. The bride I'd watched walk down the aisle on her father's arm. And I thought about how much of my life I was going to lose on the day I had to confront her. I thought about it. And then I went inside and worked on my files for 2 more hours. On August 15th, 2025, I sat Malik down in this kitchen. It was the first time I had said anything to him that even hinted at what was happening. I said, "Baby, I need you to do something for me. Sometime in the next few weeks, your Uncle Raymond is going to invite you to his house. When he does, I want you to go. I want you to listen to whatever he says. I don't want you to ask him anything about your trust or your grandpa's money or the company. I want you to tell him you trust him completely. Can you do that?" Malik looked at me. 22 years old, taller than his grandfather had been. Serious, steady eyes. He said, "Grandma, is something wrong?" I said, "Something was wrong, baby. I'm fixing it." He said, "Do you need my help?" I said, "I need you to trust me the way your grandpa trusted me. Can you do that?" He said, "Grandma, I'd trust you with anything." I touched his face. I said, "I promise you something, Malik. Before this year is over, you are going to have the future your grandfather wanted for you. All of it, I promise." He nodded. He didn't ask any more questions. That boy has more wisdom in his 22-year-old heart than Raymond has in his 48-year-old law degree. On September 22nd, 2025, Raymond called me. He said, "Mama, we need to have a family meeting. Can you come to my office next week? I'd like to get some paperwork finalized and Patricia will be there and we can have lunch brought in. Nothing stressful. I just want to make sure everything is in order so you don't have to worry." I said, "Honey, that sounds wonderful. What day?" He said, "Thursday, September 25th, 10 o'clock. My office in Buckhead. You remember the address?" I said, "Of course, son, I'll be there." He said, "I love you, Mama." I said, "I love you too, Raymond." I hung up the phone. I walked into Theo's office. I sat in his chair. I looked at the magnolia tree through the window. I said, "Theo, it's time. I've got the shovels ready. Now let's see if they dig." On the morning of September 25th, I put on a gray dress. Plain. Simple. The dress of a woman who was not important. I put my reading glasses in my purse. I put a bottle of water in my purse. I put a small notebook in my purse. I did not put any of the evidence in my purse. Eleanor had already filed it all, sealed, with the Fulton County Probate Court, scheduled to be opened and acted upon the next day. I drove to Raymond's office. I parked in the visitor's lot. I took the elevator to the 22nd floor. I looked at myself in the mirror of the elevator on the way up. An old black woman in a gray dress, hair pulled back, a little tired around the eyes, soft-looking, harmless. I smiled. The elevator doors opened. The elevator doors opened on the 22nd floor. Raymond's firm, Sullivan, Prescott, and Whitmore, occupied the entire floor. Glass walls. White marble. A receptionist behind a desk the size of a small car. She was young, blonde, polite in that rehearsed way that told me she'd been trained to handle visitors. She looked up. She said, "May I help you, ma'am?" I said, "I'm Anna Washington. I'm here to see my son." Her whole face changed. She'd heard stories about me, apparently. She said, "Oh, Mrs. Washington, Mr. Washington is expecting you. Let me walk you back." She walked me down a long hallway with offices on either side. Each office had the name of a partner on the door. At the end of the hall was a conference room with glass walls. Raymond was already inside. Patricia was there, in a cream-colored suit. Jerome was there, in a navy blazer with gold buttons. And a man I didn't recognize was there, sitting at the end of the table. He wore a gray suit and had a leather portfolio in front of him. Raymond stood when I walked in. He hugged me. He smelled like cologne that cost more than my first car. He said, "Mama, thank you for coming. Let me introduce Charles Prescott. He's a senior partner here, and he's going to help us walk through the paperwork today. Charles Prescott stood up and extended his hand. I shook it. I smiled the smile I used to give parents at parent-teacher conferences when they were about to tell me their child never made mistakes. I said, "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Prescott." Patricia came around the table and kissed my cheek. She whispered, "Mama, you look tired. Are you eating?" I said, "Oh, honey, you know how it is." I sat down. I placed my purse on the floor beside my chair. I put my hands in my lap. Raymond said, "Mama, I want to start by saying how much Patricia and I love you and how much we miss Daddy. We know this has been the hardest year of your life, and we don't want to add any stress to what you're already carrying." I said, "Thank you, son." He slid a document across the table. Thick, maybe 40 pages. "This is just a consolidation of everything we've been discussing. A little cleanup of Daddy's estate paperwork, some updates on the trust structure, a few adjustments to the company management so Patricia and I can handle the day-to-day business decisions and you can just enjoy your retirement. Nothing complicated." I looked at the document. I didn't open it. I said, "Raymond, before I sign anything, I have a question." He smiled. He said, "Of course, Mama. Anything." I said, "Where is Malik's $2.8 million? The room did not move. Raymond's smile stayed on his face, but it stopped working in his eyes. Patricia's hand, which had been reaching for a glass of water, froze in the air. Jerome's jaw tightened. Charles Prescott said, "I'm sorry, what?" I said, "Mr. Prescott, I asked my son a question. I'd like him to answer it." Raymond laughed, a short, nervous laugh. He said, "Mama, I don't know what you mean. Malik doesn't have a $2.8 million trust. Daddy talked about setting one up, but he never finalized." I reached into my purse. I pulled out one piece of paper. I placed it on the table. It was a single page, a photocopy of the trust document from September 15th, 2020, signed by Theo, notarized by a real notary, witnessed by Gregory Sullivan. I said, "This is the trust document, Raymond, the one your father signed, the one that put $2.8 million into an account for your nephew, the one that named you as trustee." Raymond stared at the paper. He didn't touch it. I reached into my purse again. I pulled out a second piece of paper, a summary of the bank transactions. I placed it next to the first. I said, "This is what you did with that money, Raymond. $850,000 to a Delaware shell company called Washington Family Holdings. $1.2 million to your wife's personal brokerage account in Connecticut. $400,000 to Jerome's real estate firm. $300,000 to a hedge fund where you are the sole signatory." Patricia made a small sound, like a child waking up from a bad dream. I looked at her. I said, "Patricia, stop." She closed her mouth. I turned back to Raymond. I pulled out a third piece of paper, the handwriting analysis report from Dr. Pierce. I said, "This is a forensic analysis of the signature on the amendment to your father's will, filed on January 8th, 2025, the day he died, the day he was unconscious from 9 in the morning until his last breath at 4:47 in the afternoon." I pulled out a fourth piece of paper, a still image from the security camera in Theo's bedroom, time-stamped. 11:43 a.m., January 8th, 2025. Theo alone in the bed. No one else in the room. I said, "Your father installed a camera in his bedroom in December. I have footage of every minute of his last day. No document was signed by him on January 8th. The amendment is a forgery. The signature is fake. Dr. Howard Pierce, forensic document examiner at Georgia State University, has confirmed this with 94% confidence." I pulled out the fifth piece of paper, the email from Patricia to Raymond. I read it aloud, slowly, so they could all hear it. "Daddy signed. Got Kevin to witness. Mom doesn't need to know yet. We'll handle the paperwork after the funeral. Jerome says the transfers should be clean by February if we move fast." I looked up. I looked at Patricia first. She was crying. Silent tears, the kind that just run down a face without warning. I looked at Jerome. He was staring at the table. I looked at Raymond. He had gone very pale. His lawyer face had fallen off, and what was left underneath was just my son, the boy who used to climb on my lap and ask me to read him The Snowy Day, the young man who graduated from Harvard Law School and cried when he thanked me in his speech at the dinner afterward. Charles Prescott cleared his throat. He said, "Mrs. Washington, I think I need to step out of this meeting." I said, "No, Mr. Prescott, please stay. As my son's employer, you have a professional obligation to hear what I'm about to say next." He sat down slowly. I pulled out one final document, The 2024 will. Theo's real will, the one Eleanor had drawn up on June 12, 2024, 6 months before his death. Fully witnessed, fully notarized, fully legal. I slid it across the table to Raymond. I said, "Read the first page." He picked it up. His hands were shaking. He read. The room was completely silent. When he got to the section listing me as the sole recipient of his father's 45% of the company, combined with confirmation of my existing 55%, giving me 100% ownership, he set the document down and put his hands on his forehead. He said, "Oh God." I said, "Read the bad acts clause, Raymond. It's on page 11. He flipped the pages. He read silently. When he was done, he looked up. The bad acts clause stated that any heir who engaged in fraud, forgery, or any illegal activity related to the estate would forfeit their entire inheritance, and the forfeited amount would be redirected to Malik's trust, meaning that because of what Raymond and Patricia had done, they were no longer legally entitled to the $500,000 each that Theo had left them. That money now went to Malik. Raymond said, "Mama, please, listen. Let me explain." I held up my hand. I said, "Raymond, I am not finished." I took a long breath. I looked at each of them, one at a time. I said, "I want you to understand what is going to happen tomorrow morning. Tomorrow, at 9 o'clock, my attorney Eleanor Whitfield is filing 3 motions with the Fulton County Probate Court. A motion to confirm the 2024 will as the legitimate final will of Theodore Washington. A civil suit against you, Raymond, for breach of fiduciary duty, embezzlement of a trust, and fraud. And a formal complaint with the Georgia Bar Association regarding your conduct as our family attorney." Charles Prescott exhaled slowly. I could see him calculating what this would mean for his firm. I said, "Additionally, the full evidentiary file, including the federal crimes involving interstate transfer of embezzled trust funds, has been provided to the FBI's Atlanta field office and the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. That was done last Friday. You may expect a visit from them at your home or office at any point over the next several days." Raymond put his head down on the conference table. Patricia said, "Mama, please." I said, "Patricia, be quiet. You are not done listening." She put her hand over her mouth. I said, "Now, here is what I am offering you. 2 choices. Take your time deciding. But I want answers by tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock before Eleanor files the motions." I paused. I took a sip from the bottle of water I'd brought in my purse. I said, "Option 1. You fight me, you hire lawyers, you contest everything. You lose, because I have absolute proof, and you have nothing. Raymond, you lose your bar license. Jerome, the IRS investigates every single one of your business dealings for the last 10 years, and I happen to know from Gregory that at least 4 of them involve tax fraud on a scale that will send you to federal prison for 15 years. Patricia, you are charged as a co-conspirator in wire fraud and will likely receive 5 to 8 years. Meredith will divorce you, Raymond. She already contacted Eleanor 3 weeks ago to ask about prenuptial terms. Your daughters will grow up visiting their father in prison. Amara and Zuri will grow up with their father in prison too, Patricia. That is option 1. Jerome let out a breath that sounded like a man who had just been punched. I said, option 2. You sign a document I have prepared. In that document, you agree to the following. Raymond, you repay the full $2.75 million to Malik's trust within 90 days. I don't care how you do it. Sell your house in Buckhead. Liquidate your retirement accounts. Beg Meredith's father for a loan. I don't care. The money is back in Malik's trust within 90 days. Raymond nodded slowly, his head still on the table. I said, Patricia, you and Jerome transfer the deeds to 2 commercial properties that Jerome purchased with funds originating from Malik's trust, total combined value $1.4 million, to the trust. Not to me, to Malik, directly. Jerome made a sound like he was going to protest. I looked at him. I said, Jerome, do not speak. You are in my son's office, but you are not a member of my family. You never were. I never approved of you. Theo never approved of you. You are here only because my daughter is here. Do not speak. He didn't speak. I turned back to Raymond. I said, Raymond, you immediately resign as executor of your father's estate and as trustee of Malik's trust. Eleanor becomes both. You sign over all documentation by the end of business tomorrow. I turned to both of them. I said, Raymond and Patricia, under Theo's 2024 will, you were each entitled to $500,000. Because of your bad acts, that money is automatically forfeited to Malik's trust. Instead, I am personally, from my own funds, offering each of you $200,000 as a one-time payment. That is less than half of what your father wanted you to have. It is my punishment for your betrayal, delivered in the only currency you seem to understand." I paused. I said, "You will not contact Malik unless he contacts you first. You will not appear at family gatherings unless he invites you. You will not speak to me about this again, for as long as I live, unless I invite you to. If you violate any of these conditions, I reinitiate all legal proceedings immediately." I took one more sip of water. I said, "Finally, the FBI investigation is already in motion. I cannot stop it. But if you cooperate fully with the federal authorities, return every penny, and admit to what you have done, my attorneys have reason to believe you may be offered reduced plea agreements. Raymond, possibly home confinement instead of prison. Jerome, possibly a shorter federal sentence. Patricia, possibly probation without prison time, given your cooperation and the fact that you have minor children. That is the best outcome I can offer you. It is more than you deserve." I stood up. I gathered my papers. I put them back in my purse. I said, "You have until 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Eleanor's office. Either sign the agreement or we proceed with option 1. I am leaving now. Do not call me tonight. I will not answer." I started to walk toward the door. Patricia stood up. She said, "Mama, please, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I stopped. I turned around. I looked at my daughter. I said, "Patricia, I have mourned your brother David. I have mourned your father. And from this day forward, I am going to be mourning you too. Not because you are dead, because you made yourself a stranger to me. That is the worst kind of loss. I hope someday you understand what you have done. But today is not that day." She sat back down. She sobbed into her hands. I walked out of the conference room. The receptionist stood up as I passed. I didn't look at her. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor. I walked out of the building. I got in my car. I drove home. I did not cry until I was inside my own house with the door locked behind me. And then I cried for 2 hours, sitting on the kitchen floor, the way women have been crying on kitchen floors for centuries. Then I got up. I washed my face. I made myself a cup of tea. And I waited for the morning. At 7:52 the next morning, Eleanor called. She said, "Anna, they signed, all 3 of them. The papers are in my office." I said, "All right. Tell them what happens next." She said, "The FBI visit is scheduled for 11 this morning. The agents have already been briefed. Raymond and Jerome have both retained criminal defense attorneys overnight. Patricia is terrified, but she's cooperating." I said, "Thank you, Eleanor." She said, "Anna, are you all right?" I said, "No, but I will be." Over the next 4 months, everything my family had built and stolen was redistributed, one document at a time. Raymond sold his house in Buckhead for $1.8 million in November. He moved into a 2-bedroom apartment. Meredith filed for divorce on December 4th, 2025. She kept the girls. Raymond agreed to supervised visitation every other weekend. He paid the $2.75 million back into Malik's trust. Every dollar of it. In January 2026, the U.S. Attorney's Office offered Raymond a plea agreement. 18 months of home confinement, 5 years of probation, permanent disbarment from the practice of law, a fine of $500,000, and full cooperation with ongoing investigations into Jerome's business. He took the deal. He moved to Columbus, Ohio, where his mother-in-law has a sister who agreed to take him in. He works as a paralegal now for a small firm that handles traffic violations. Patricia and Jerome transferred the 2 commercial properties to Malik's trust. Jerome was not so lucky as Raymond. The IRS uncovered 7 years of tax fraud in his real estate dealings. He is currently serving the 2nd year of an 11-year federal sentence at a minimum security facility in Alabama. Patricia received 3 years of probation and 2,000 hours of community service, which she is performing at a women's shelter in Riverdale. She and the girls moved into a rental apartment near the shelter. She works as a leasing agent for a low-income housing complex. Amara and Zuri attend public school. I send birthday cards to both girls every year. I have not seen Patricia in person since the day she signed the agreement. Malik's trust was restored to $4.1 million between the $2.75 million Raymond returned and the $1.4 million from the properties. Eleanor manages it now as trustee. Malik graduated from Georgia Tech with a degree in civil engineering in May of 2027. He took a position with Washington Construction Group, starting as a junior project engineer. Entry level. He insisted on that, just the way his grandfather started. As for me, I took over Washington Construction Group at age 70. I hired a young chief operating officer, a woman named Gwendolyn Harper, to run daily operations. I kept the strategic decisions for myself. I still do. I work 2 days a week from this kitchen table. I used $3 million from the estate to establish the Theodore Washington Memorial Scholarship Fund. Every year, 10 full scholarships are given to Black students pursuing civil engineering degrees at historically Black colleges and universities. We have funded 40 students so far. 3 have graduated. All 3 were hired by our company. Malik interviewed each of them personally. I went back to teaching. Not for pay. I volunteer at Frederick Douglass High School, tutoring 9th graders in algebra twice a week. The teachers who work there now were children when I retired. They call me ma'am. I correct them. I tell them, my name is Mrs. Washington. I've earned every letter of it. Patricia came to my house once on Thanksgiving Day 2027. She stood on my front porch for 20 minutes. She didn't ring the bell. She just stood there. I watched her through the kitchen window. I didn't open the door, but I left a warm cornbread on the front step with a note that said, "Grandmother has not forgotten you, but I cannot trust you yet. This cornbread is for the girls. Do not come back unless you bring them." She came back for Christmas that year with Amara and Zuri. The girls ate at my table, and Patricia sat across from me, and we did not talk about the past. We talked about school and sports and what the girls wanted to be when they grew up. When they left, I hugged Patricia at the door. She cried. I didn't. It was a start. I don't know where it ends. I am 77 years old now. It has been 7 years since Theo died. I still sleep on my side of the bed, even though it's been empty the whole time. I still make coffee for 2 in the morning, out of habit, and drink 1 cup and pour the other into the magnolia tree outside the back door. Malik comes by on Sundays with his fiancée, a young woman named Imani who teaches kindergarten. They are getting married next June. He asked me last week if I would walk him down the aisle, because he has no father and no mother, and his grandfather is gone. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I sit at this kitchen table sometimes and I think about what happened. I think about the 3 children I raised. I think about how money revealed them, the way water reveals a stone in a stream bed. I think about Theo, who saw it all coming before I did. My children thought I was the prey. They thought age had made me soft. They thought grief had made me weak. They forgot who signed the loan in 1983. They forgot who wrote the invoices on Sunday nights. They forgot who stood at the kitchen table in 1983 and handed a $12,000 loan paper to a defeated man and said, "We will build something." They forgot their mother. I didn't raise a fist against my own children. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't weep in public. I solved the math, 1 step at a time, no emotion, until I found the right answer. And the answer was this: numbers don't lie, and neither does a woman who knows how to count. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have daughters, tell them. If you have granddaughters, tell them. Age is not weakness. Grief is not weakness. Silence is not weakness. Sometimes silence is just a woman deciding where to place her pieces before she moves. Please leave a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if you have ever had to protect what you built from the people you loved. And subscribe to the Never Too Old channel, because we are building a community of women who know that the best chapters of a life can happen at any age, even when the world has told us our chapters are done. My name is Anna Washington, and my husband left me a map, and I read every line of it.